Good evening, everybody. It is 6:30, so we'll start. Welcome to the Housing and Environment Overview Scrutiny Committee of Thursday the 16th of January 2014. I'm hoping we can finish the agenda quite easily tonight. We have three main papers, well, the minutes and two papers. Agenda item 1, fire evacuation procedures. I believe everybody in the room is familiar, but I'll still go over it with you. There was no fire alarm planned, so any fire alarm is genuine, so please vacate the building down to the War Memorial Park. Webcasting of meeting, which is assisted with a screen up there. We are being webcast and goes onto the internet and is recorded. Agenda item 3, to receive apologies for absence. Not aware of any. We have one from Councillor Beam, and he may be late, and he is late. Item 4, resignations and replacements. We welcome Councillor Miller, who's in place of Councillor Steele tonight. Thank you. Item 5, declarations of conflict of interest or whipping decisions. Councillor Reid.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to declare an interest as a private landlord. I've checked with legal, and as long as we're just talking about HMOs in general, then it's not a pecuniary interest. My only concern is with the new amendment, and I don't know whether possibly Laura could sort of elucidate on this a bit, but 2.3c, Charter of Standards for the Committee to discuss for all local private landlords. According to the advice I've been given, if we are talking about a charter for all landlords and not just HMO landlords, then that would be a pecuniary interest, and I'd have to declare and not take part. And I imagine that might apply to other members as well. So I wonder whether, Laura, perhaps you could just clear that up.
When we're referring to all private landlords there, we are referring to in the broadest sense, but this particular in C makes reference to HMOs, but I think it would be good practice to have one that goes across all private landlords. But that is making reference to, in our motion, is about HMOs.
Okay, so if we're sticking to discussion on HMOs, then I think we're all fine this evening. But obviously, if we stray into general terms, then I certainly, for one, would have to leave.
Councillor Peach.
Rather than repeating everything, I'd reflect exactly what Councillor Mrs. Reid has just said, if that's okay.
You haven't forgotten my name, have you? Same ditto.
I'll have to declare as well, and the fact that I lived in an HMO when I was in education, and I am a private landlord. Are there any other declarations? In which case, item 6, urgent items, nothing. Item 7, to confirm the minutes. Just before we do, on page 17, I'd like to draw your, of 42, I'd like to draw your attention to an error. A third of the way down, it's landlord repossessions in Basingstoke, not landlord's possessions in Basingstoke. There's a typo there. Councillor Baker.
There are a couple of other typos, Chair. On page 14 of 42, in a minute 28 of 13, Councillor Mrs. Reid, I'm sure, didn't declare that he is a landlord, nor did Councillor Ms. James. So there's an S that has slipped out from both of those.
Thank you for pointing out that. That was noted at the pre-meeting. We didn't think it changed the actual context, hence I didn't bring it up tonight.
No, but for the benefit of future readers of the minutes, it looks better if they're grammatically correct. And on that note, on page 16 of 42, in the resolution little 2, Homosync conference and individual comments which have captured by the housing manager There's a been missed out there. And in the next paragraph, little 3, officers prepare a report for consideration at Housing Environment Committee meeting being held on. Delete in and insert being.
Thank you. Can I clarify that the officers have got those comments? Thank you, they have. Councillor Mrs James, you wish to speak.
Yeah, the first thing I would like to raise is I sent yourself and Tracy Cole asking about the resolved issues and dates. In relation to the one relating to the public health and someone coming from county, can I ask that when we have that meeting that it is a one-item agenda, because the committee did ask for that, and that we don't have, so that we have got plenty of opportunity to have an in-depth discussion with them. That's my first. Is that okay?
I'll ask the officers to note that.
And the second one is in on page 16 of 42, resolve number 2, little 2, and it's the point that the same paragraph that Paula Baker picked up. It's following the Homeless Link conference, and we asked the committee, we asked the officers to go away and look again and work up the changes. I'd just like to say thank you to the officers for those changes. They're very significant in relation to now providing hot food and also local connection. The one that I would ask is, it talks about there will be additional facilities available in May Place in the foyer. Is it possible, can we arrange for a visit to May Place to see the foyer? And as a committee, would that be possible for us to go and look at the foyer? But again, thank you for the significant changes that have been made.
As I could actually put it straight to the committee now, would the committee like to go? Could it just nods or shakes the head would be useful, please. Right, the officers have got the request, it's noted. Thank you. Right, we're still on item 7. We've heard nothing that they're not correct, so can I sign the minutes, please, as correct? Have a proposal and seconder, please. Thank you. Item 8, member and public participation. The only ones declared is Councillor Keating to speak on paper B. Item 9, Councillor Golding is, or was here, he is still here, thank you, for paper C. And we will welcome him when paper C comes. Item 10, referrals from other committees, there are none. 11, there are no issues from Cabinet. So we now move on to the gist of the meeting. Sorry, I am been told I need to take the public participation now.
You can do it just before the paper. You're going to do it, aren't you?
Yes. I was going to ask, when we move on to paper B, I was going to ask the public to come in there. So we're moving on to paper B, which is item 11 now, and I will ask the public to come forward, please, and speak. Councillor Keating, sorry.
Thank you, Chair. Many of you will recollect, I believe, that the original motion to introduce this subject matter was produced by me and on the council order paper nearly a year ago now. And if you refer back to page 20 of item B, you'll see the contents of the motion at the top of the page. also see that there is no reference within the motion to ownership of any particular pieces of land, as well as noticing, I'm sure, that Downgrange is in there. Now, many of you will be aware that I led a campaign that the playing field bit of Downgrange should be preserved and protected, and that bit of Downgrange is actually owned by Hampshire County Council. So, if following the proposals within the paper, land ownership by the Basingstoke and Dean Borough Council only, would mean that that particular bit of Downgrange would not be protected. The other concern that I've got, I'm going to be brief, Chair. The only other concern that I've got is that many councils up and down the country are selling off greens and open spaces, sometimes even parks. Now, I know there are no current plans in Basingstoke and Dean, but the intention of the motion was to protect into the long-term future our existing parks and open spaces. And it would constrain, inevitably, any council of the future of Basingstoke and Dean, and in the area of Basingstoke and Dean, from selling off effectively for development any land. Because if you sold the land, ownership would change and therefore the protection wouldn't apply. That's the concern I've got. So I'm sure that you'll debate these issues later. I have to go to another meeting. So with those amendments, I hope you will discuss and approve such amendments. On that basis, then we would have an effective protection into the long-term future. Thank you, Chair.
Could you just clarify, please? You're concerned about the council selling its own land to another landlord, then it won't be protected, and you're concerned that part of. Could you just clarify which bit is part of Hampshire County Council, not the borough?
Just for absolute clarity, the proposal did not refer to ownership. The first motion, the original motion, did not refer to ownership. It was intending to protect parks and open spaces irrespective of ownership. The proposal from the officer refers to ownership being the criteria. So you have ownership, therefore you have a criteria to protect. What I'm suggesting is that ownership is not the criteria which would select the park or open space, because it is an existing park and open space. One doesn't need ownership in terms of saying downgrade should be protected, which was the overall intent in the first place.
Thank you for clarifying. I understand better now.
You're very welcome.
I'll now ask the officer to introduce the paper, please.
Thank you, Chairman. First, if I may just point out two minor typos within the report. First of all, paragraph 8.1 on page 23. It should say the 10-point criteria, not the 11-point criteria. And secondly, over the page on page 24, appendix 1, item number 3, there is the word of needs to be deleted. Apologies for those minor errors. Chair, this report follows on from a previous paper which the committee considered in November. At that meeting, the committee the committee asked officers to look again at the approach we'd put forward for, I think at the time it was referred to categorisation of green spaces, and what categorisation was used to protect those green spaces. Officers have reviewed that and have now put before you a 10-point criteria that's shown in Appendix 1. This picks up the various comments made by the committee and by local interest groups during the meeting and in fact after the meeting as well. The main changes between the 10-point criteria before you and the categorisation are outlined at 5.1.3 of the report. Chair, the committee is invited to comment on the 10-point criteria, and the suggested decision-making process outlined in 5.3, and also note that their comments will be included in the report to the Cabinet member seeking approval to a way forward. If I could just try and respond to the point Councillor Keating was making just there. This motion has been referred to all three of the council's OSCOMs. The Planning and Infrastructure OSCOM, I believe, have not necessarily debated this motion per se, but certainly in reviewing policies in the local plan associated with open space and planning protection of open space. I believe there are changes that have been afoot in those various policies and are still subject to consultation through the local plan process. So I hope that any protection of third-party owned land would be given protection in some way under the local plan. Obviously what this paper here and what this committee's role is to look at parks and open spaces and what protection is afforded to them in this council's capacity as the Parks and Open Spaces Authority for the borough.
Right, we are opening the meeting to questions from the officers. Could we have a show, please, or indicate which councillors want to speak? If we can get all these down. Councillor Washbourne, Councillor James, Councillor Peach, Councillor Leeks, Councillor Miller, and Councillor Baker. Is that the... Right. Thank you. First on the list was Councillor Washbourne, please. If we can stick to 2 questions each, hopefully we can get round. Thank you.
Thank you. My first question is in relation to 5.3.1 on page 22 of 42. In the final sentence it says, and the list will be adopted with regular revision. Can you explain exactly what that means, the regular revision of the list?
Regular revision is clearly meant to explain that if a site has been missed for some reason inadvertently, or perhaps it's not been put forward, that obviously we would look at that site, we would apply the criteria that is proposed, and it would be added to that list accordingly. Clearly what the decision process the decision process outlined in the report talks about any removal of sites from that list would be a council decision by council. If I could also refer you to paragraph 6.2.1, where we're talking about reviewing a list on a regular basis, say every 2 years we talk about there. That's what I mean when I refer to regular revision.
Thank you. So, in reality, then the regular revision is to simply add to the list. Obviously, the procedure, if sites were to be removed from the list, we would have to go to full council before it could be done.
That's just for the sake of clarity, he's nodding.
Yes, that's correct. Yes.
Thank you. And my second question is in regard to number 10, the exceptions criteria on 25 of 42. It mentions here that any earlier council decision, if any earlier council decision has already been made to either develop a site or investigate a potential of a site, or if a previous decision has been taken to access across a site and may be required in the future. Do we know at this stage if any of the parks and open spaces that have been added to the list actually fall under that at this time?
The council has made various decisions about its land interests. One that comes to mind, for example, would be a decision to investigate the provision of football pitch on War Memorial Park, and that's a decision was taken some time ago. Under this criteria, Memorial Park would almost certainly qualify for protection. What that exception would look to do is says, as we've already made a decision as a council about examining Memorial Park, we couldn't, let's say, retrospectively go back on that decision simply because we're applying a criteria. it would effectively expect the football pitch option to be pursued until it was got to a point where perhaps it could continue or couldn't continue. If it couldn't continue, then this criteria could be applied to that type of site. So that's just one example. There are many. I couldn't necessarily list them all, but that's just one example.
Thank you. We then move on to Councillor James.
Can I also ask, in relation to the exceptions criteria, it's where it says where a previous decision has been taken that access across the site may be required in the future. And I know at the last meeting there was a real lot of concern from the residents of Old Down, supporting Old Down. Would that mean that Old Down is in or out? Where are we with that?
My knowledge, the council's not made a decision to provide an access across Old Down, and therefore that would mean that Old Down wasn't included as part of that exception.
So can I just explore with you in relation to the Appendix 1, we used Old Down as an example, so I guess Old Down would meet the criteria and it would be protected. If the council then wanted to develop on that site, could you talk through the decision-making process and how that would work?
As of today, Old Down would qualify for protection under the proposed criteria because it has a sink status. It would not meet the exceptions criteria because it has had no previous decision made about taking access over it. If that site was required for access, and therefore we would look to remove the protection, any decision about that would be made through full council, and that's the decision process that this report outlines.
Decision-making process, there's no reference to the community, and that concerns me. Could you just, there's a cabinet member, but and full council, and full membership of the council changes and who has control, but there's no reference to engagement with the community in making that decision.
I think it's a given that clearly as a council we would engage the community before taking that decision. It's very hard, obviously, at this time, just to say exactly what shape that would take. In many ways, we're kind of talking hypothetically, but so it's very hard to actually understand quite what shape that would take. I would suggest that clearly any decision would be considered as a recommendation through full council, and a debate would be had at full council about that, and the community at that time would have the opportunity to voice its concerns to full council as to why perhaps the protection shouldn't be removed if that was the proposal going forward.
Thank you. We now move on to Councillor Peach for your two questions. Back at this time, Councillor Peach.
Thank you, Chair. Again, on the exception criteria, page 25 of 42, it said green spaces would not be afforded protection. I just wanted to pose the question, could they be afforded some level of protection until the decision is final, and then when that final decision is made, if it was positive for the piece of land in question, that it would automatically fall into the criteria of protection?
I think because and I use the Memorial Park as an example again, because we've already taken a decision to explore an option for that in terms of the football club, I think that option would need to be examined as far as it can go. If that meant a football club wasn't provided there, at that point it would be appropriate to look at the site to see whether this criteria applied, and if so, to apply the criteria in the circumstance where it did apply.
Thank you. So what we're saying is the decision that is specific at that point then wouldn't be open to further possible decisions while it's out of the exclusion criteria. Do you see what I'm saying? So that once you're satisfied the football pitch definitely will not happen, it goes back to being a park, it goes back to protection. Is that how it works?
I think if that's the conclusion of the examination regarding the football pitch, then yes, the Memorial Park would be looked at. Does this criteria apply? And if it does, it would apply.
Thank you. Councillor Eakes.
I'm pleased to say that Councillor Peach answered my question.
Councillor Miller.
That was my one and only question. Thank you.
Councillor Baker.
Sorry. No, it hasn't. It in fact provoked another question again with the exceptions criteria. In a large area such as the War Memorial Park, there is the possibility of the football club. There is a decision that's already been taken. I would assume that if another proposal came along while that one was still uncertain as to whether it would go ahead or not, that for a different area of the War Memorial Park. Now, I would say that the remainder of the War Memorial Park still should be protected.
I would think I would agree with what you're saying, Councillor Baker.
Good. Then in criteria 9, is there scope for there being considerable debate about how much community value is significant and how regular use should be, and how sustainable the existing groups are? That rather worries me that could be an area of difficulty in the future.
I think that point's noted by officers. This was one of the criteria which did give us a great deal of difficulty in trying. How do you measure community value in effect? Hence, the suggestion there was that having a sustainable existing friends of group, or that the space was regularly used for established local organised events, and where that could be proven, then I think it would be fair to say you could afford a protection. If those things perhaps didn't exist, but somebody decided they want to set up a group or suddenly run an event to try and enable protection, then I think they wouldn't necessarily meet the criteria of point 9.
Councillor Reid, and then we go back to Councillor James.
Thank you, Chair. I'm sorry, Richard, I'm going to ask you another hypothetical question on the theme of Old Down, I'm afraid. From your answers to Councillor James and from the criteria we have here, Old Down would meet several of the criteria, so it would be afforded protection. And it's not subject to an earlier decision. But what we decide, or what we comment on tonight, goes forward to Cabinet, which then goes forward as a recommendation to Council. So actually, whatever we say tonight, we are not actually guaranteeing protection to Old Down or anywhere else, unless and until that decision goes forward to Cabinet and is agreed, and then is agreed at Council.
Absolutely correct.
Thank you. That's second.
Councillor Mrs James.
It wasn't one of the questions, but I just want to ask this. It was in relation to the War Memorial Park and the proposal for the football pitch, or whatever you might call it. Let's call it football, whatever it is. Yeah. And it's a decision of council that we look at it. And I guess it's a bit like we have saved policies from the local plan that are saved until we have new policies. But if this comes for, if this is adopted and it goes to full council and the cabinet accept this and it goes forward and we support this, if there is then in the future a planning application in relation to the War Memorial Park, won't they have to look at this and say that this is what the council have supported and this is what their intention is in relation to open space, and that in relation to the planning application that you're minded to in relation to this piece of open space? I don't know how you can, or is it because of you've got the get out of jail on number 10, and I'm not sure how many sites are under investigation, how many what the officers are looking at.
Again, trying to sort of answer this hypothetically, if the War Memorial Football Club site moved forward to the point where a planning application was submitted, then clearly the planning authority would consider that application in relation to the policies within the local plan. The council as a landowner have already made the decision that they're prepared, that they are willing for that area to be available for a football pitch. But of course there's lots of hurdles to get through that planning process to secure that consent, and dare I say many other hurdles as well. So in trying to answer your question, this committee is considering it as the provider of open space. We're not considering it here as the local planning authority, and I think, as I referred to Councillor Keating's point earlier on, any planning element associated with protection is for the local planning authority to apply, not necessarily for this council to apply in its landowning capacity. I hope, does that answer your question?
Well, my only concern is, and I'd quite like it, I know you can't give me this information now, but in relation to the decision in relation to that football pitch, I'm not sure we made the decision to do that. I think the decision was that we would explore, and so I think it's quite different. So I'm quite welcome if you could send me the decision that we made in relation to the football pitch, so I can understand that, because I didn't think we as a council had actually made that decision. I don't remember voting on that as...
We're working on the football option as a result of the cabinet decision. If you want me to send you the cabinet decision, I can do that. But as I say, it's very different between this is a landowner decision where we've said yes, we will consider that. We're talking to the football club about the option. They've still got to go through the planning hurdles, which they may or may not be successful. So this is purely with our landowner hat on. We're saying yes, it's acceptable, but the planning's different.
And the one that I want to pick up was in relation, the other question is in relation to Appendix 1, number 6. So we work the way down the appendix answering the questions and we get to number 6, and is the green space at least 0.2 hectares in size? That's the minimum that is required. If yes, proceed to 9. If no, so if it's not, you proceed to number 9. And then this is the one that Paula picked up on in relation to 9. Is the green space of significant community value? My concern, there are many urban spaces that won't meet that criteria in relation to 9. They'll be enjoyed by the community, but they won't have a local group, or they won't have a established locally organised community event or activities. Does that make it any less valuable, or from protection? And I'm not sure that fits with the what we were wanting to achieve in relation to the motion that we put forward as a Labour group.
I think, as I explained in response to Councillor Baker there, trying to measure community value is very hard to do, and clearly a community will always say that the space in their immediate vicinity is of value to them. Obviously, what criteria 9 tries to do is to give some boundaries to what we mean by community value, and obviously the suggestion there is you have an existing established friends group that's sustainable, that you have established organised events. The size criteria in number 6 is mainly to help as you work through points 7 and 8, the size criteria isn't necessarily relevant to number 9. So irrespective of the size of the space, if there is an established group, if there were to be an established event, then the site would be afforded protection.
Councillor James, you have one more question. There's 2 councillors came in late. If you have any questions on paper B, could you indicate now? Or else after this question, Councillor James will go to debate. Right, Councillor James.
I'm still concerned because there are lots of pieces of open space in the urban area, and if we don't meet it, if we get down to number 6, and if we have to then move, if the answer is no in relation to that number 6, we then have to proceed to 9, and then if it's not met in 9, we then, that's it, it doesn't afford protection. And there are many pieces of open space that are enjoyed, but they don't have organised community events, and they don't have existing friends of groups, and I think that urban pieces of open space are being disadvantaged. Is there any way that we can look at changing or amending that 9 to support some of those urban spaces? Otherwise I think it will disadvantage, and it isn't in the spirit of what we were trying to achieve in the motion.
I think, Chair, in response to that, I'd perhaps welcome the committee's thoughts on whether they wish to see that particular criteria, number 9, changed in some way or amended in some way to better reflect what Councillor James is seeking.
We can address that in debate. Councillor Beam, did you want to say anything?
Thank you, Chair. That's very generous. I had a question here, 523. It says green spaces within the 4 regeneration cluster areas, but then only mentions 3. Has one got lost somewhere?
No, there are 2 clusters in the Buckskin ward.
Thank you. Next one is 532. It says there that the Cabinet Member for Environment would have the delegated powers. Then the following paragraph does say that it will go through full council. The 2 seem to, though, contradict.
You may have missed the discussion just earlier in the meeting, Councillor Beam. The suggestion is that the Cabinet Member would have delegated authority to create the list and add to the list, but any decision to take a site away from the list would be made following consideration by full council.
I don't have a problem with that, and with that explanation I'm happy with that. And the last one, Chair, thank you. Going to the appendix and the numbered bits and pieces, sentence 3 doesn't make sense to me. Can you help? It says, does the green space provide for residents? Thank you. That's it now.
Thank you. We now move to debate. Can we take a... Councillor Mrs Waldridge, I'm told, did you have a question? Thank you. Right, if we're going to debate, could we have a list of speakers, please? Baker, Waldridge, Beerman, Peach, Miller, James. I'll read the list out. Someone's Councillor James, Councillor Waldridge, Baker, Peach, Miller. Is there anybody who wants to speak? Councillor Beerman, did you wish to speak? Right, please, yes. That's okay. And Councillor Mrs Washburn. Councillor James, you're on the top of the list.
Thank you. I have real concerns about the criteria in Appendix 1. If you look at the motion in 3.1, it talks about our long-established parks, our open spaces, and in the spirit of the motion, when we was talking about, I think Sean raised this tonight, it didn't talk about ownership, it meant the boroughs, and what we were looking at is having a list of parks and open space that we value, and there are some parks and open spaces that are sacrosanct and we wouldn't develop. and like Reading, they have a list, and they say that in this map, there's a map, and there are some sites within the town or the borough of Reading that will not be developed. And I don't think that this actually achieves that. It still says that it's still possible to develop them, and it says that they can go forward to full council. And politics of full council is if you're not in control, you could have some amazing pieces of open space within your area, but and lots of politics happens in full council, and you could lose those pieces of space. And so I don't think it sends out a message to the people in the town that we as a council absolutely cherish the War Memorial Park, and I think that we need to have very key pieces of land within the borough that we protect, and therefore I'm concerned about it. I'm also concerned about the decision-making process. If we are going to have a decision-making process, I think we have to be very clear as to what that is. And like I said, it doesn't include, and there's no mention there of the community. And I know you're saying that it's automatic, but I think we need to make reference to the community and be clear of the process. I would like to know what spaces are in at the moment and how we get those spaces that we all wanted added, because I think there was concern at the last meeting, but we felt until we determined the process we wouldn't put the space, the parks in. So it's important to know what parks are there and how we can get them in now. And in relation to the criteria, I do feel that it does make it difficult to protect some of the urban areas, and when you look at 6, as I've said, in relation to size and in having to move forward to 9, I think there will be areas that are really valued by the communities in urban areas, but because they're not, they do not have existing friends or groups, or there's no established local organised community activities, they therefore won't be protected. And I'd ask us to look at that again. And I think that, as Sean has said, we need to have a list that includes other land that we value. It doesn't mean that we can stop it from being developed. And what we said at the last meeting is we have a list of, that we hold of buildings that we hold of value in this town and borough. We don't own them all, but it just means that we value them. We can't say that it won't be developed, but therefore I think that it should be other sites, and one of those being Hack Lane, which is valued by the community, should be added to the list. We can't stop it being developed, but we need to say, as part of this motion, is that we value that piece of open space.
Thank you. Councillor Waldridge.
Thank you, Chair. I'm not going to go at length, but I'd like just really to echo most of the points that Councillor James said, especially with relation to community involvement. I think that it needs to be clearly identified in this process, and also the criteria 9 in relation to significant community value, establishing what that means and tweaking that number 9, so, for the reasons that Councillor James said. So I won't go on any more than that, but just wanted to reiterate those points.
Thank you. The officers are noting the comments. Councillor Baker.
Thank you, Chair. Yes. The process of the initial list and giving the delegated power to the Cabinet Member for the Environment and Climate Change, I would certainly think that all of the committee would like to have the assessment breakdown and the draft list, and I would hope that would actually be published well before the Cabinet Member took the decision, so that we can see in practice how the criteria are applied and how it works on various areas of land. I think that's quite important, because that first act of setting that initial list, until we see it, we're not going to understand fully how the criteria will impact on spaces. So I believe that that's important. And I'll leave it at that.
Again, I noticed they've made notes. Councillor Peach.
Thank you, Chairman. Just following up on point 9, I think exactly what Councillor Mrs James is saying was probably picked up in your questions, and that was simply about if the space is used regularly, how do you understand that it's used regularly? I mean, we adopt like a traffic assessment, people on clickers watching how many times someone goes on the land. That is obviously done for you guys. You've got to work that one out, and I think that probably establishes how regularly a piece of land is being used. Or is it that the local community regularly holds a Sunday fair there, and if they do, then that's clearly demonstrated that that urban piece of land is highly valued to the local community. So to make it clear, I'm not disagreeing with what was said, I'm agreeing, and I think there's just an element about understanding what significant and regular actually means. But overall, personally, I think what you've put together here, I hope, and to see a list that's produced out of this that reflects what everybody is seeking to get out of this. And I know also that this can only go as far as to protect council green spaces, because if it's private land, of course, or basically not in our ownership, then we can only assume the only method of protection or over that is simply the planning route. Because if we physically don't have any control to dispose that piece of land or to protect that piece of land, then we have to rely on a different mechanism other than this. So can we put pieces of land on there that are not in council ownership? Probably not, because this wouldn't have any impact on that. So we have to rely that our policies in our planning guidance has the provision there to enable us to have that. My final point would be following Councillor Mrs Reid's assessment of previous decision and giving a bit more understanding on that, whether there needs to be some kind of deeper understanding or clarity along that final second to final sentence, or where a previous decision has been taken, just to explain what that previous decision, because I think what came out of it was earlier this meeting we confirmed that a piece of land may well be protected, but then through clarifying that perhaps at this stage it's not. So that just might be worth understanding precisely what that means.
Thank you. Councillor Miller.
Thank you, Chair. I think it's spelt out fairly clearly in the report on page 21 of 42 in paragraph 4 about the land situation. There's only so much we can do with land in our ownership. And as it says, the policies in the local plan can look at, and the planning process can affect those areas not in our ownership. I think that's an example. There's a couple of areas in the town and outside of the urban area that in fact in shared ownership, where part of it belongs to the council, part of it belongs to either a private owner or the Hampshire County Council. So that I think that's a very valuable paragraph in that interpretation of the motion, just to make sure that we understand where we are. Coming on to the criteria, if I can use a technical expression, this is not a bad flow chart, because that's exactly what it is. It's a technical way of going through the various processes. Where the difficulty seems to come in item 9, and I'll come back to the mention of community involvement. That's what we're here for. We represent our communities. And if there's any question about green spaces, We should know what those green spaces are in our own. I'm in an urban parish, as is Councillor Beerman. We know our local area, we know our community. We automatically consult with them. If there's any question about any particular area in our communities, we're the ones that should assist in that consultation. If we can't talk for our communities, why are we elected? That's my principle. So we don't need to get a process in here. It comes, if I dare say it, automatically. We do it off our own initiative if nobody else puts it into a list of things to do. I do it all the time, in conjunction with Councillor Beerman and Councillor Still. I don't see any difficulty with it. You can put it in the process, but we do it anyway. It would also be going through a process within committee. We represent the communities. So that's called democracy. Now, talking about changes in the council makeup, I think is irrelevant. It's a red herring, because that's what we do in democracies. This could be applied in 20 years' time, and it wouldn't matter. It's what the decision of the representatives of this borough have elected the people who make the decisions. I've got no trouble with it. I like the tone of the paper. Yes, there's a few questions to answer in it. I don't think anybody in this room could actually improve the wording of number 9. If there's a criticism of number 9, may I suggest that the officers are offered another alternative wording? Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Beerman.
Thank you, Chair. I think this is a great leap forward from what we had before. I'd just like to take this question about the community engagement a little further. I think I'm going to differ slightly from my colleague there. Yeah, we're all three of us fantastic councillors and we always consult, but we might just be voted out of office someday and our successors might not be quite so thorough. So I think this document needs a process in it that underlines the consultation process. So I know elsewhere in the main report it says that certain procedures exist for consultation. It needs to be part of the process that's outlined in these sort of terms of reference and what Councillor Miller calls a flowchart. I rather wickedly, when Councillor Baker, I think it was talking about assessing the land usage, the thing that crossed my mind was amount of dog deposits, but that was perhaps counting them. That was perhaps not the kindest and hopefully ever decreasing way of counting activity, unless you count plastic bags with deposits in them as a viable assessment. List update. I had expected, Chair, as I say, I think this report is a great leap forward, but I thought we would have the updated list. That's the list that we had at the last meeting, plus the ones that have been added since, because I know there have been some added, not least because, well, at least I hope they've been added, because I sent them through to Mr. Wareham. So the list should look a bit different now, and I would just like to have seen what direction we've gone in with the sites being considered.
Thank you, Councillor Beerman. Councillor Washbourne.
Thank you. Well, I'm afraid, I'm slightly differing than other councillors on this. I think, yes, the paper is actually achieving or would be able to allow us to achieve some kind of list of sites which we would so-called like to offer protection. In our motion, we requested that the Cabinet look to ensure that our long-established parks and open spaces were protected from development. Looking at this, I don't know what real protection this is actually going to offer them in real terms. We're creating a list. We are showing that that these are established parks and playing fields, and they are of importance to our communities. But at any one time, any one of these, including places such as the War Memorial Park and Eastdrop, as far as I can see, these sites could then be taken to full council. A decision could be made to then develop on those sites. I don't see that this paper is actually going to stop that happening. Other councils have lists where they have a criteria 1 list which will say that these sites will never ever be built on, a criteria 2 where these will only build on if they absolutely have to, and then a criteria 3, which are sites of interest, and obviously they would be taken to full council. As far as I can see from this paper, everything that would be on this list would be in that criteria 3, which it could be taken to full council, and then it could be voted on at some point to be developed on, and that's my only concern on this paper.
I'll just ask the officer to come in and do a point of clarification there.
Well, thank you, Chair. Only really to say that obviously the council can't act to fetter its future decision making. So this is a process that is establishing a way that full council has an opportunity to review the list and to make future decisions. And it can't be in a position where it's saying I've set something, that the council set something up in stone that can never be looked at in the future. There has to be a mechanism for review so that the council isn't fettering future decision making.
Thank you, Councillor Reid.
Thank you, Chair. Following on from my question to the officer and his answer, I'm quite concerned that we get something down on paper now. We get some action, and we actually get something moving forward, going to Cabinet and to full council. I understand people's concerns, but I think if we don't take this forward tonight, we could just wordsmith it forever, to be honest. I think we do need to start getting something forward and getting some protection in now, for as many places as we can that we value. So I would support the paper on that basis. Really non-council owned land, again, I understand concerns of councillors that it doesn't quite reflect what they intended in their motion, but this paper is dealing with council owned land, and if anything, I think possibly what Councillor James, I don't want to put words in your mouth obviously, but possibly what Councillor James is talking about is almost a list of cherished sites that perhaps aren't council owned, and that would be a separate matter, I think, to this paper, and that might be one way perhaps of addressing that. And I would agree with Councillor Baker and Councillor Bierman that it would be useful to see some sort of draft list, as long as that doesn't hold the process up and as long as we can actually get something moving quickly. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I'll ask the officer to do a summary of the points he's made, but please could we bear in mind page 19 of 42, we're looking at the lower part there with his points being made.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I'm just going to try and sum up what I've taken as the comments of the committee. So please feel free to tell me if I haven't judged that correctly. But generally, there was issues raised around whether the list and the criteria initially should be council owned or wider. But I think it was generally recognised that the list needs to reflect the council's ownership because planning processes and policies will cover non-council owned land. There was comment to go forward on the criteria, particularly on criteria 9 around what is the definitions or how will significant community value be determined in reality. So I think there's some questions there for some comments there. But particularly also a comment to say, well, does the current drafting not fully cover urban open spaces? So I think that was a point to go forward to Cabinet. I think also there was general support for the decision-making process that's outlined in the report, except again there was some comment around what was appropriate community involvement and whether the process needs to have some reference to what community involvement would be. And again, there was differing interpretations, but again, I think possibly the overall comment was, can there be some reference to how that would be dealt with in the final draft? And the final point I had was that the committee was really after seeing a list of, or at least a draft list of the list prior to Cabinet considering it, and they felt that Cabinet obviously ought to see that list before making a decision on the criteria.
Thank you. When the draft list was being said, I noticed a few nodding heads, so I think that's agreed everywhere. If we continue to look at the lower page 19 of 42, the recommendation, it is recommended the committee comments on the suggested criteria and the suggested decision making. That is being done, and we've got notes. The second part, the committee notes that its comments will be included in a report to Cabinet seeking approval for a way forward in order to make a recommendation to full council. Are we all happy with that, please? Agreed? Thank you. That completes paper B. Councillors, I welcome Officer Tom Payne to the table regarding the paper C that we've got in front of us. Basically, it's to do with houses of multiple occupation, HMOs. Could we come back to the table, please? Whoever's missing. Thank you. Right, I'll ask Mr. Payne to outline his paper.
Thank you, Chair. I also must report some typographical errors, unfortunately, in the report. On page 29, paragraph 3.6, it says January, whereas it states January. It should say February. Page 31.
Top.
Yes, top line. Page 31, paragraph 9.2, and the second paragraph, there's a missing word here. It should read, and will provide support to tenants. Missing the word to. And 9.2 on page 31, second paragraph, penultimate sentence. And finally, on page 36, paragraph 3.1, again, it should read, the council has a specific duty, just missing the word has. Right, just to introduce that, so this paper is brought to you as a result of a council motion that was put forward by Councillor Laura James on the 11th of July regarding good practice and policy on HMOs. This committee was tasked with examining points A to F that are listed in this report, and to assist members in debating this particular motion, this report sets out some context and some background as to our working practices with regard to HMOs. There was, as I recall at the time that the council motion was put forward, a particular case that was of concern to members at that time, particularly Councillor Paul Harvey. We had a situation where one particular landlord owned a property that was causing some issues to local residents, and we were actively dealing with those concerns at the time. There was a concern that Councillor Harvey put forward at full council that this particular landlord possibly owned up further 14 properties within Basingstoke that we may not be aware of, and the concern that Councillor Harvey had was that potentially there's a lot of HMOs that we're not aware of. Perhaps licensing is necessary just to to make sure that they all come forward and that we are aware of the standards in those properties. I'm glad to say that we have clarified since that time that we are indeed aware of all the properties that particular landlord owned. They were already on our database, and they were subject to inspection by us, so we are aware of the standards in those properties. It didn't therefore change the figures that were presented at full council in terms of the numbers of HMOs that we are aware of in Basingstoke and Deane. So the figures that you had then were correct. There is updated figures in the Appendix 1, which does show the current numbers of HMOs within Basingstoke and Deane Borough Council. There was also a concern, particularly in relation to that particular case, in respect of the landlord potentially not holding deposits in the correct manner. Again, we've since been able to clarify that the landlord in question was not requiring his tenants to pay any deposits. Therefore, there was no breach of legislation in that case either. We have given a lot of advice and guidance to that particular landlord, and the issues that were of concern at that time have been addressed, as far as I'm aware. Right, in terms of just explaining a bit more about the council's approach to dealing with HMOs, firstly, we do have a protocol in place, internal document, if you like, between various council departments that potentially have interaction with HMOs. So environmental health being the team that will regulate HMOs, that will ensure that standards are being met. The housing team, obviously in dealings with tenants and landlords, again, key partners. Planning, and so on and so forth. It lists all of the teams that do have interaction, and it shows within the protocol set out in Appendix 2 how we liaise with those teams to make sure that we're all aware of potential HMOs, and that our team certainly will visit and inspect those HMOs to ensure that standards are being maintained. We've also previously, as I understand it, provided a list of all HMOs that we're aware of to ward members, with the intention that if there are any other HMOs that are not on our list, that we are made aware of them by yourselves, and of course we will then investigate them. As an addition to the protocol, we have introduced a change in the sense that Victoria James will from now onwards act as a point of contact for members. So if you have an HMO within your wards that is causing concerns, or you would like us to look into further, then initially as a member you should contact Victoria, and she will ensure that there's communication and contact with all the teams in the council that need to be aware of that, and then we'll feed back to you to let you know what action is being taken. The report sets out, that obviously there's mandatory licensing of 3-storey HMOs where there are five or more people, and sets out the number of those that we have within Basingstoke currently. It's 32. In addition to this, the working practices at Basingstoke are that we will also monitor the non-licensed HMOs. So of all the other ones that we are aware of that are not licensable by mandatory licensing, we will still carry out inspections, we will still be making sure that standards are being maintained. The Appendix 1 will also shows you the level of enforcement action that we have taken against in respect of HMOs to whether issues have come to light. In none of these cases have we ever come across a situation where we've needed to take formal enforcement action, i.e. prosecute a landlord for non-compliance. We find that we work with our landlords, and they bring their properties up to the required standards without the need to take that type of formal action. The other point I was going to mention was also around landlord accreditation schemes, which is mentioned in the council motion. There has been consideration of this previously. A paper to this committee in 8th of March 2012, where we considered adopting essentially the National Landlord Association accreditation scheme, and it was resolved that consideration would be given to that within the housing and homelessness strategy, and it does feature as a specific action on the council to encourage landlords to consider signing up to that to that scheme. That is something that is covered within, assuming many of you have seen this already, but Basingstoke and Dean Borough Council's Good Practice Guide for landlords, which includes reference to the National Landlords Association. There's some shaking of heads. I'll certainly make sure that everyone gets a copy of this after the meeting. It's a very comprehensive guide to the standards that we would expect, details about tenancies, National Landlord Association accreditation scheme. It's all covered within this particular document, which landlord liaison officers will be giving to landlords when we deal with them, and we also give them out when we're dealing with landlords as well. Fundamentally, the existing powers that we have to ensure that standards are maintained are, in our view anyway, satisfactory. They're working. We don't have issues where landlords are not complying and don't deal with issues that we bring to their attention. And the other contrasting feature that you tend to find where local authorities have introduced additional licensing schemes is just the sheer numbers. In Basingstoke we have about 150 HMOs in total. The other authorities that are included in the appendix tend to have thousands, 2,000, 3,000, where they've got a huge, dealing with a much larger scale of housing to look at, and again necessitates perhaps consideration of additional licensing in those areas. But from our perspective, we don't feel that the powers that we have are not adequate to address those concerns. I'll hand it over to.
Thank you. We now have questions to the officer. Could we have a list of councillors that want to? Councillor Bierman, Councillor Baker, Councillor Washbourne, Councillor James, Councillor Miller. Anybody else? Councillor Waldridge. Right, we'll start down the list. Councillor Bierman.
Thank you, Chair. Could I just start by asking about the fees? How do the fees work? Is it just a flat fee, full stop, for a licence, or does it depend on the premises, and what sort of level is it? That's my first question.
I do believe that the fees are on our website. I don't actually have them to hand. I think they're about £500, which is a one-off fee for 5 years, so it's approximately £100 a year to cover the cost of us carrying out a visit every year to inspect them essentially, and to administer the licence in the first instance.
So there's a flat fee. If it's a large premise as opposed to small, makes no difference.
Yes, that's correct.
Thank you. And the other was just very simply, you referred to the fact that we have had lists of HMOs in our wards. I do seem to remember having had one, but some time ago. I don't know when it was last circulated, but can I ask that it be recirculated unless I missed it last week or something?
Yes, certainly. That was one of the recommendations that was included within the report, that we will. I think it's mentioned within the report. Sorry, that we will send you a full list of all the HMOs, and again encourage all ward members to let us or make us aware of any other HMOs that we're not aware of.
Thank you. Councillor Baker.
Well, that second question of Councillor Bierman's was one I was also going to ask, saying, when is the update going to come, please? My second question relates to the protocol itself in Appendix 3, because when I get to the point of para 4.3 on page 38 of 42, and that planning and development have a different definition of HMO. That then prompted me to reread the whole thing and try and work out, now is that an HMO in terms of the housing, or is that a planning and development's HMO? And is there any way we can resolve this issue so that there is no confusion about what kind of properties are being talked about in which paragraph of the protocol?
The reason there's a difference is because there's a difference. Yes, in planning legislation it's defined in one way, in the Housing Act it's defined unfortunately in a slightly different way. So it is unfortunate that it has to. There's not a common definition, if you like. But we're interested in any properties where there are more than 3 people, two-storey properties that don't form the same household, sharing amenities. That, in a nutshell, that's what we're considered to be an HMO.
Could you just clarify the mandatory one and what we consider one? Because I think there's confusion.
So you're quite right. Yes, it's 3 or more. And the mandatory definition, so if you require a licence under the mandatory scheme, you're looking at 5 or more occupants and a 3-storey property.
One further bit of clarification. On page 27 of 42, the proposal, if we pass it, is April every year. We will get the list come through to us. It's on the lower part of page 27 of 42. Councillor Washbourne.
Can I just pick that up and say, under the present circumstances, can we just have it a bit earlier this year?
I believe because it's relevant to this committee, it should come, yes.
I'll look to provide this certainly within the next week or 2 at the latest.
Councillor Washbourne.
Thank you. I mean, my first question was already put by Councillor Beerman in regard to the list, as obviously I wasn't a councillor in 2011. My second point is in regards to page 33 of 42, number 4, under the complaints and enforcement. Would the officer be able to tell me what are the total housing complaints received by the council, so to allow us to see what percentage these complaints for HMOs are?
I will provide that information. I can circulate that after the meeting. I do recall that we did I did have the figures. I didn't bring them with me. But we did compare it because we looked at 2011, the 2011 report that came to this committee, which did look at the proportion of the total number of complaints. Yes, it's table 1 of that report showed that around 20% of the total number of complaints, housing complaints we receive, relate to HMOs, and that proportion stayed the same. It was just one of the things that we did look at. But I'll certainly give you the figures for all housing complaints.
And you're saying 20%, and has that figure changed at all over that period from 2009 to this to 2013, or has it stayed at roughly 20%?
I didn't look at all of the intervening years to know whether it's fluctuated between 2011 and now. It seemed to be quite stable in this report, that it didn't fluctuate that greatly. I'll certainly give you those figures. I'll give you the last 3 years. That's quite straightforward, and show it as a percentage of the total number of complaints.
Councillor James.
Thank you. Can I pick up on in relation to you talk in the start of the report about Councillor Harvey and one of the properties in Normanton Road? You said you did know about it. How long did you know about that property? That's my first question.
I don't have the specific dates that we became involved, but certainly we had complaints from a neighbour in relation to that particular property. That was specifically in terms of noise, as I recall at that time. The officer who was investigating that complaint then involved our housing standards team as soon as it was aware of it, because there were certain concerns about the construction work that was going on at that property. So we were aware of it already. It was an HMO that was on our list, but it was going through a renovation at the time, and there was certainly some issues there that we took up with the landlord. I can give you dates if that would assist.
So you became aware of it because of a complaint, but you didn't know about it before the complaint.
We knew about it. It was an HMO that was on our register, so it's not a licensable HMO. It's only a two-storey property. It is subject to periodic inspection by us. The reality was the landlord of that particular property was extending it, and certainly there was some disruption to the tenants who were living there, and our housing standards teams did look at that and did work with the landlord to make sure that it was still safe for those occupiers to live in, and that there were no risks to them.
And in the start of the report, you talk about tenancy agreements, and you say, given the transient nature of the tenants, tenancy agreements were not also in place. Is that acceptable? Are we saying that in relation to HMOs that we have that are not licensed, is it acceptable not to have, or would we as a council want to see tenancy agreements?
Certainly we had some discussions with that particular landlord. The landlord liaison officer in particular had meetings with that landlord, and we did advocate having tenancy agreements. It's really it's much in their benefit as it is for the tenants. It gives them rights as a landlord, so it's really important. So we did explain that to the landlord in question. He had used tenancy agreements in the past. His experience was that tenants didn't necessarily comply with them, and they weren't really of benefit to him, so he wasn't insisting on it routinely. But we did stress that we considered it to be a really important thing for him to do, and it was something that he said he would be taking forward.
Not licensed, you can't do anything about that. If he chooses to have 14 properties with no tenancy agreements, we can't require that, can we?
No, I mean that doesn't feature under licensing anyway. When you've got a licensable HMO, there is no condition that says you must have a tenancy agreement in place with your tenants. So it wouldn't feature as a condition on a license, even if you had a licensable HMO. But it's certainly good practice. As a landlord, it would be common sense really that you should have them in place with your tenants. And we did obviously explain the benefits that there are to him to have those agreements in place.
Councillor James, do you have another question? I'll ask for one more, then we'll move to Councillor Waldridge.
Can I move to Appendix 1 in the last table on page 34? The enforcement, it talks about, if we just look at 2012-13, there's a total number of enforcements is 24. Enforcement notices 12 of HMOs. That's 50%. Is that how does that compare? Because that's 50% of the enforcements are HMOs. What's the total percentage of HMOs of the housing stock? How does that compare? It seems incredibly high.
I'm just double checking the. I will have to provide you with figures for all enforcement notices on other types of dwellings apart from HMOs. I don't have those figures to hand. The table is showing you, as far as I recall, it's just showing you the numbers for HMOs specifically. I'm happy to clarify that and take that away and give you an explanation of the types of notices that are served and the numbers across the board.
Councillor Waldridge, did you have any questions?
Thank you, Chair. Right, one of them's been answered. The other one, the protocol point 4.3, you say it's recently been updated. Was there a protocol in place before? And if so, how has it been changed from the one that was in place before? Thank you.
There has, as far as I'm aware, there's been a protocol for at least 4 years, possibly longer, but it predates my involvement with this particular service, so I'm not sure the exact date, but it has been in existence for a long time. The two reasons really for updating it: one was there have obviously been changes in the structure of the council, so some of the teams have changed and the responsibilities have changed, so that was updated. And also, obviously, to pull out the key point here, that Victoria is now a point of contact for members, and obviously updating that to reflect her new role. So they're the two reasons why it was reviewed.
My second question, turning to page 33 or 42, the prevalence of HMOs. I suppose I'm trying to understand how you know that is the total number of HMOs, or are you saying you don't know that, but that's what you think the total is? Only because I understand reading the appendix at the back that you've got all these different services which you share information, and that's a good way of finding out. But unless somebody's on benefits, unless there's been complaints about the property, and it might not be on the council tax, because it could be the landlord that stays on the council tax and then just splits the council tax bill amongst the tenants. There would be not necessarily any way of knowing that it is a HMO. So I'm trying to understand how you can be sure that those are the total number of HMOs.
This is just showing you the total number of HMOs we are aware of, and obviously we do endeavour to identify them in whichever way we can. So obviously various council teams that may have information that would indicate whether there's HMOs or not, we work with, and they do provide us with information. Complaints from tenants, again, a key source of information to find out if there are properties we're not aware of. And of course, yourselves as ward members, if you're walking around your areas, you tend to know that properties are occupied by more than one household, and you're a great source of information. So that's how we, if you like, gain that intelligence. But there's no one foolproof way of saying this is the one way that we'll identify all of them. It's just represents what we know of at the moment.
So, given that I think somewhere else in the report it says that you will endeavour to inspect every 3 years, I think, even the non-licensed HMOs. If we get suddenly more coming out of the woodwork, is that a commitment that would still follow, that you would still endeavour to do that?
Yes, it is, yeah. That's our approach.
Thank you. Councillor Miller.
And actually, Chair, it's asked and answered.
I believe Councillor James said you had some more, so I'll come back to you for a couple of 3 questions. And right, so noted.
Mine's on 8.1. It's in relation to the maintenance and management of the standards. In there you say that you ensure a compliance. Every licensed HMO will be inspected, and then any HMO that you became aware of whom a complaint is made against, those where those HMOs not requiring a license are also inspected on an annual basis, where the level of management observed or the risks Could you tell me, of the 124, how many of those were inspected as a result of that, and how many then are going to be inspected on a yearly requirement? And if you look at the figures, we've seen an extra 40 in the last couple of years. And I just want to have an understanding of how many actually got inspected or are on a 3-year rolling programme, and where we are on that. We can have some sort of understanding of that process.
Again, that's something I'll have to take away and send to you by way of additional information as to exactly how many are subject to an inspection each year, or how many of those are subject to the inspection once every 3 years. I don't know those figures I don't have them to my head, so I'll have to send you those figures later.
In relation to that, how many of the 124 were inspected last year and won't be inspected for another 3 years, or are they? So I'd just like to have a feel for where they are in the if they've not been inspected as because they're a risk. Where are they in the 3-year cycle? How many have we got that need inspecting next year, or how many do we have been inspected this year? So just have that. If you could send that information, that would be great. And in relation to the figures in the start of the report, you say it's the figures are static, remain fairly static in the past 3 years. But if you look at that first table on Appendix 1, of the non-licensed HMOs, they're not static, are they? I mean, there's a general trend, and that last one is not for a full year, it's only for 8 months. So we've got 124 in 8 months. So the trend is quite a significant increase, and the trend is up. Is it not, or is you're thinking that's static?
Certainly what I was saying in the report is that over the last 3 years, and I'm including this, I accept it's only a part of the year, way through the year, but we're seeing pretty stable numbers in the last 3 years. In April 2011, I believe there was a different approach being taken by the officers in charge of this particular function, and there was not quite so as much scrutiny on these non-licensed HMOs. It wasn't an area that was prioritised, if you like. So that figure may not be accurate at that particular point in time, anyway. So over the last 3 years, certainly I have more confidence in the figures that we have there, and they are showing a pretty stable number, either between licensed HMOs or non-licensed HMOs. It is a gradual trend upwards. Yeah.
Thank you. Councillor Day.
Thank you, Chair. Can I just for clarification then for me, so if I was a landlord and I had an HMO licence from you, would that tell Mr. Public who's looking for property that that's a kite mark of excellence or quality from the council? In other words, I wouldn't have dampness, I'd have windows that actually closed, I'd have heating, I'd have hot water, I'd have all those things that one would expect in today's environment. Is that what this is ultimately about then? The council is saying, okay, you've got this, you've done it, so we're giving you the kite mark, we're giving you a tick to say this is. So we housing could actually say to people who are looking for property, but I've got an HMO here, it's got some lovely properties, why don't you come take a look at that? Is that the case?
The primary reason for there being a mandatory licensing scheme is simply because of the risk that you would associate with that nature of that property. So a 3-storey property where you have a large number of people who are not of the same household, living independently, presents a slightly higher risk by way of fire than other properties. So it's important that they are regulated and that we do ensure that fire standards in those properties are met, and that there's adequate protection for those households. So fundamentally, that's why they are required to have a licence. I take your point that it's a perhaps will give tenants some confidence that, that they are inspected and that they are meeting standards, but that does apply to the other HMOs, I would say, that we know of in Basingstoke and Dean. We are inspecting them as well, and they are complying with the standards that we would expect.
So can I be assured that in that case that you are reviewing these properties before the licence is awarded? Thank you.
Councillor Mrs James, a couple of questions, then we're going to move to debate.
Thank you. It's following on from that. If you had a non-licensed property that was a two-storey property that was historically it was a three-bedroom unit, three-bedroom house, but had been divided into 5 bedrooms, and have experience of one such property that then has in that property 12 people living in there. In one of the rooms you have a family living in one of the rooms, tiny room, the parents sleeping in the bed and the children on the floor with no mattress, and you can just imagine, because of how many people are sharing the house, how much different plugs and how many sockets and fridges and kettles, and he even had a little burner in there cooking his own food. Would the fire service not have concerns about that in relation to fire risk? Is there any difference? I can understand that in relation to the stories of the building, but are there not the same risks for a HMO that historically the house was 3 bedrooms, it's now 5? No access to the back garden because because it's a bedroom, the lounge. You can't get out of the kitchen because there's no doors. Why is it less of a risk, a fire risk, and not needing to be licensed?
Firstly, this is national legislation. It's not Basingstoke and Dean legislation. We're talking about the Housing Act, which sets out the requirements for mandatory HMO licensing. So, and the evidence was clear that there have been obviously unfortunate cases where there have been fires in these types of properties, and the consequences are quite severe. So, there was obviously justification for insisting on licensing in those cases. I think in the cases you're referring to, where you've got particular concerns, there are obviously issues that we would look at. We would inspect, we would potentially liaise with the fire authority to address concerns in those types of properties. So we would act on that sort of concern, we would investigate, and we would make sure that standards are maintained and that the residents are protected as far as we possibly can. So I don't think that there would be a difference, if you like, in our approach. As long as we're aware of those types of properties and the concerns that exist, we would act on those concerns.
The question is in relation to the document that you held up. I can't remember what it's called. What was it? When you, I suppose it's moving away from HMOs, but when you place somebody in the private sector, or not you, but when housing places somebody in the private sector, does it meet that requirement? Are we ensuring that anyone that we house or support to be housed in the private sector, we ensure that it meets that accreditation? Is it a requirement?
In all honesty, that probably is a question that's outside of my sphere of knowledge. I would have to defer to my colleagues in the housing team to explain the processes they go through to ensure that accommodation that they're potentially going to... Yes, indeed, yeah.
Thank you. We'll now move on to debate, but I believe the portfolio holder has been, well, I know he's been listening actually, so I'll ask him to comment.
Thank you, Chair. I
I did wonder just how, particularly having looked at the proposed Labour amendment, how familiar councillors were with the guide, and I got the impression from the response earlier that not very so. Just briefly to draw attention to a few things. Tenancy deposit schemes are covered. It makes it quite clear that it's the responsibility of whoever holds the deposit, whether it's the landlord or agent, to ensure that the money is properly protected in an authorised scheme. So we're absolutely black and white about that. The other thing I meant to say, I think we pinched most of this from Southampton, who know a lot more about particularly HMOs than we do. So it's we haven't invented it all ourselves. We also quite clearly cover tenancy agreements and spell out that the requirement for a tenancy agreement to be in writing is only required by law for fixed-term tenancies of greater than 3 years. However, we go on to say that a written tenancy agreement makes it much easier to sort out disputes, and we're very clear that we recommend them in cases where they aren't required. Because, as the officers pointed out, they give benefits to the landlord as well as to the tenants. So, again, that's very clearly covered. Accreditation, as the officer has mentioned, we are, as we promised in the housing strategy, promoting a accreditation scheme run by the National Landlords Association, and the point I think he didn't spell out is a landlord doesn't have to be a member of that association to join the accreditation scheme. They can just sign up for the accreditation scheme. And we have over three and a bit pages of stuff specifically about HMOs in here. So it is all very clear. We're very keen to promote it. It's mentioned on the website. Mark Fisher's the guy who holds stocks of them, so if you need them, that's where to get them. And I think I think the last point I wanted to make is HMOs are an important part of the housing mix in the borough, particularly in the town. If you're a single person without children under the age of 35 on housing benefit, you're probably only going to get enough benefit to afford a room with shared facilities. And so we need those properties as part of the mix, but they need to be properly regulated and safe and checked. And I think the way we check, we get annual safety certificates even from the unlicensed ones. We annually inspect the dodgy unlicensed ones, if I can use that phrase, and we inspect the unlicensed ones that we're reasonably happy with every 3 years. I think strikes the right balance between protecting tenants and not imposing unnecessary burdens on HMO landlords. Thank you.
Thank you. Could we have a list, please, for those who wish to speak on the debate? Councillor James.
Chair, can I just clarify, are we taking an amendment first, or what's happening now?
The amendment hasn't been tabled yet, so we're going to have a list of questions for the debate. Sorry, list of people who wish to do the debate. Councillor James, Councillor, anybody else? One person for the debate. Councillor Beerman. Councillor. Councillor Peach. Right, we're now going into debate. We have Councillor James, Beerman, Baldridge and Peach. Thank you. Councillor James.
And as Councillor Beerman said, we would like to, as a Labour group, to move an amendment at some stage and give notice of that. We gave notice by sending it out, but in discussing the paper, my concern is that we have, for example, in my own ward, we have significant numbers of HMOs, and when you look at those numbers, it may be a small number as a whole, as a borough, but when you look at Norden, and then if you break Norden down into streets, there are certain streets where there are significant HMOs. In Osborne and Millard, we have numerous in the one street, which really has an impact, and I think that's what you need to look at. The same with Popley, it's significant for a road, and that's the concerns. But I also want to talk about the real issues of HMOs. We have landlords who are holding tenancy agreements illegally, holding deposits illegally, and there's enormous fear from tenants not to actually talk to us, and we had someone approach us who wouldn't speak until he was able to move out because he was in fear, and they were holding it and they wouldn't give it back to him. And there's terrible practices going on. And I talked earlier on about a property that was a 3-bedroom house that had been turned into a 5-bedroom house. This family that I talked about came to my attention through another agency. Had been living in this house on this floor, and the children were struggling with schooling because they're having to sleep on the floor. He was charging them more money because they were a family, even though they had one room, so they were paying more than anyone else. There was one bathroom in the whole of the property. We had 12 people sharing that house, and some very unsavoury people in there, and so the family were very vulnerable. And they had numerous sockets being used, but the reality from a housing perspective is that we didn't have a duty to them, and the point system, it was very difficult to move them, so they was in there for some time. So from a fire point of view and from a risk point of view, they were living in those conditions and had been living there for a long time. Also that the landlord had held the deposit illegally as well. That happens all the time. It's happening regularly. In Millard and Osborne, we have streets where there are 5 houses in one little close of the road, and there's lots more in that road, and parking is very, very difficult. And also the house has the insulation between the houses is poor, and you have, for example, that family would be in that bedroom upstairs, 4 of them, and next door would be a child trying to go to sleep, so it's almost impossible. So there's real concerns about that, about the standard of people's and what they're living in. I think there's lots more properties out there than we're aware of. They only come to light when there's a complaint, and I don't know where that one is, whether that one was on that list, or whether it was on the list and then came off. But if you look at the one in Normanton Road, it was so bad that the one that was mentioned in the start of the report, it refers to Councillor Paul Harvey. It was so bad that the family next door had to move out because of the abuse and the violence, and considerable violence, and that property sat empty for over 3 months. That's a social housing property that was sitting empty because it was the experience of that family was so appalling. And therefore I think that in relation to this report, and my concerns are about the report, is we haven't really looked at what we asked you to look at in relation to the aspects of the motion. I think that I hear the sentiment of the officer in saying that they will be inspecting properties. I'd like to see how many have been inspected of the 124 properties, but I don't think there's a resource that's going to be there forevermore. And what happened in Southampton, they in relation to licensing, it gave a income for the council to carry out inspections and to work to ensure the highest possible standards. In speaking to the fire service, in doing our research, they don't see any difference really. I mean, they know it's mandatory, the 3 levels, but there are just as many risks, they say, in relation to having 2 levels and having the properties subdivided. It may be a mandatory requirement, but what we're saying is we need to go further than that, and we're requiring us to set a standard. It's saying to those good landlords out there that we recognise what you're doing, but what Southampton's experience is in having a mandatory licence. We saw reduction in the number of poor landlords. And there are many very, very poor landlords out there, and some exceptionally horrendous things happening to the most vulnerable. And the harder it is for us to get property, and the harder it is for people to find accommodation, the more they will exploit people. And we now have a housing benefit system which says that anyone under the age of 35 will not get housing benefit unless you live in a HMO. And so they're requiring people to live, and therefore there are some very vulnerable people potentially that we will be housing or will be housed in HMOs, and we need to ensure that they're of the highest possible standards. And I think it would be very good practice, as do many authorities, to move towards mandatory licensing.
Thank you. Councillor Beerman next, please.
Thank you, Chair. I'll talk to the main motion as it stands, or the recommendation, and I might just assume that the other thing had been tabled just so that I can do it all in one hit. I look upon HMOs as being almost akin to things like neighbour disputes and so on, where there's never a clear answer, and you can't write a protocol to cover all situations, so it's very difficult. I'm eternally grateful for the fact that I'm in a ward where HMOs is not a big issue. In fact, thinking about it, I can only think of one instance in my rather long term of office where that has even raised its head. So I speak with some deference in front of those that do have a lot more experience in this area. I do also, however, note and understand what the portfolio holder said about the importance of the sector and not making it too difficult. I mean, my gut response is let's make it mandatory that everybody be licensed across the borough, bum bum bum. But when you start doing that, firstly, there's a lot of bureaucracy. It can be unfair to some landlords by adding further bureaucracy to their activities and increasing their costs, which they might need to pass on. But you know, my gut feeling would say let's do it across. But I think perhaps if we are going to go in that direction, there are intermediate stages, and I think the sort of things that are in this report could be the intermediate stage, where before one goes the whole hog, if it turns out that where we're at now or what we're looking at now isn't going to be enough at the end of the day. I have also just a bit of an uncertainty and a discomfort, not so much so that I would vote against it, but in the reference to the original motion, and this is now on page 27 of 42, I like the idea that the council will support tenants in challenging illegal holding and rents of rent deposits. I like that idea, and equally the next one about illegal tenancy agreements. I'm a bit nervous about how open-ended that might be, where that might lead, because I could see, if we were really taking that on seriously, that could become quite a financial burden, and from the protection of the council's role, I just have that degree of uncertainty without in any way saying we shouldn't do it, because I think it's a worthy thing to be seeking to do. Just lastly, if this amendment in red were to be tabled, were to be seconded, sorry, it has been tabled, if it were to be seconded, I'm just a bit unsure about having 3 blanket wards covered and then nowhere else. I think it's probably more an issue of having areas or locations covered and borough-wide, because you know, why, if something happens in what's Southam on there, Southam, why not have that covered in the same way? So I think it should be broader and yet narrower, if I can put it that way. It needs to not be it needs to be not confined to the wards listed. It should be wider, but on a need to do what basis more. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Waldridge.
Thank you, Chair. Firstly, I'll start with some positives, because I think there was some good things that I read about in this report today which I wasn't aware that we were doing like the single point of contact that there now is going to be in the new protocol, and the clearly saying the services are going to be working together, and the fact that the protocol's there, and the commitment to inspect even non-licensable, non-mandatory HMOs every 3 years. So there's a real positives which I wasn't aware of as a councillor. But my overriding concern is that I don't think it's really clear in here, and I still don't think it's clear how many HMOs we have out there, the non-licensed, the ones that don't need a licence, and so that is a concern. And I think really the fact is we haven't seen this I don't think any of us have seen this landlord's best practice guidelines till tonight. So if we've not seen it, you can rest assured there'll be lots of landlords out there who haven't seen it either. So regardless of how good the guidance is and whatever it's saying in there, how widespread has this document been distributed? So I think part of the thing we need to do is to do more to promote to landlords and to tenants what's in that best practice guidance, and just and promote to them why it's important that the council are aware of these non-licensable, HMOs, for the safety reasons, fire reasons that we've mentioned tonight, so that both tenants and landlords can come forward, as well as us as councillors, to let the officers know where these HMOs are. So I think that's something that we need to be doing. So alongside this protocol, we need to be doing more promotion work, because I don't think I've seen this best practice thing on the website. I can't remember doing, so I'd be interested to know if it is on the website, but I don't think it is. It's a big document, but I might be wrong on that. It might have recently been put on there.
Could I ask you also just to clarify, because I think other people may be interested in that point.
Okay, thanks. Sorry.
There is reference to this document on the website. The actual document is not downloadable. It talks about contacting Mark Fisher to obtain a hard copy of it. I believe they're exploring because there's some advertising involved in producing this guide. I believe there's some constraints on us putting it on the website, and the officers are working with those concerned to try and overcome that particular issue, because obviously it would make a lot more sense if you could just download it. But for the time being, you can contact Mark Fisher to obtain a hard copy.
Sorry to interrupt you, but I was interested as well.
Not at all. Thank you for clarifying that, because I was going to kind of want that clarified anyway. But even if that whole document can't be on the website, maybe a summary of the HMO advice that's been mentioned, and so that's on the website. So I think maybe even a series of press releases to promote this in the press or in the Basingstoke Today would be a good way forward as well. So I think that's it for now. I might come back later. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Peach.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm just sort of picking up on all the comments that we've heard tonight, and actually found it a really interesting discussion. Just trying to think where to start. From what I understand, there's 150 HMOs recognised in the area, and I think you alluded to perhaps, was it thousands elsewhere in some of the other comparison boroughs? And I'm thinking, so somewhere like a university town where HMOs are more prevalent, you'd probably expect to have more of a much stronger licensing process in place to keep track and to keep control of that. But from what I've heard from the report, it sounds like you're keeping track of things for the most part, and I do appreciate the point that you don't always know they're out there until you get the complaint that comes in. But I'm not sure how else you would know, short of being out on missions trying to find houses when they're happening. What I would say is, going back to the road you mentioned, in the days of working at Sentinel Housing Association, some properties have covenants attached to them, and obviously housing associations have to lift that restricted covenant, and with that can often come liaison with planning. So what I would hope to see is, if you are unable necessarily in the first instance to attach a license, or that we go down the road of a licensing scheme, that perhaps there's a discussion with the planning team in their policies that they need to understand the parking issues and the impacts that it might have in allowing too many conversions. I mean, one conversion in the road might be acceptable, but then if you have the whole street converted, all of a sudden you have a bit of an issue on your hands. And so they can't look at a property single-minded, so it's about that joint-up work between yourselves and the planning team. There was also mention about some of the more aggressive landlords, and I would probably imagine, even with a licensing scheme, they would be the least likely ones to be signing up to it anyway. And I would really hope that there's violence involved, that obviously the police are involved, because no matter what licensing scheme you have, I can't imagine that's going to be able to tackle criminal matters. But again, I think it's worth mentioning the point that you've made, because it's not always as clear-cut as it seems. And just another thought takeaway is that when our housing allocations team are allocating, perhaps to HMOs in the future, I'm sure they are doing it already, that they would be allocating to licensed properties that they're satisfied of the standard that they're going to be allocating, and obviously appropriate to the housing needs of those people. So obviously a large family being allocated into one room would be completely inappropriate. And if it's okay, because it's been tabled the motion, I mean, just for my own sake, I was reading through it, and point A, where the officers prepare a proposal for the committee to discuss a defined area, although you've expressed certain concerns, overall there doesn't seem to be a major concern, and there's enough properties and enough officers that you can manage this issue quite successfully, and that's what you've told us, that where you know about it, you've worked with landlords and they've reacted and they've dealt with the problem. So that for me answers the first one. That we're encouraged as councillors to report HMOs, well, now we have, again, as you, Councillor Waldron said, we now have that single point of contact. So I hope that, again, perhaps, you've already done it, so we don't necessarily need to motion that. And in terms of a charter standards, obviously we've learnt tonight that we also do have a very, very detailed set of standards that perhaps we can be guided by and refer people to, both our constituents and landlords. So all in all, I feel that the council motion has been really useful for me, because it's just brought out so much discussion. I've actually learned quite a lot as well about what Basingstoke and Dean are doing, and for the most part it sounds like we are delivering a positive result, and with the exception of perhaps a couple of properties that have been described, but overwhelmingly well managed HMOs. So thank you very much.
Right. Could we clarify from the Labour group what they wish to do with their amendment, because we haven't had it officially proposed and seconded yet?
I'd like to propose the amendment or recommendation.
And I'd like to second that.
Thank you. So we are now looking at I hope everybody's got a paper in front of you with the red writing on. Correct? Everybody's seen it, got it? I'd like to thank them for actually pre-printing it and getting it out before the meeting. It does help matters. Right. So we've now got this amendment to look at. Could we please have a list of speakers who wish to speak regarding the amendment? Are there any speakers who wish to speak? Right. Councillor Baker, Waldridge. Sorry, Baker, James, Waldridge. Washbourne, sorry. Baker, James, Washbourne. Any other speakers wish to speak? Just to inform, we are discussing, if we are going to discuss to all landlords, there's a few people may have to declare an interest, because there are some landlords around the table tonight. So if we can keep the discussion general to this, please, not to all landlords, else we do have some interests that we will have to, as we declared right at the beginning. For the two late councillors, there were some declarations of interest of councillors being landlords as well. So that's just... Right, there's three speakers. Councillor Baker, please.
Well, I'm minded to support this.
I will ask Councillor James to start then, if everybody's happy to introduce. Yes. Councillor James.
In moving the recommendation of to you, why we did this is, and I know you're saying that it's just a small number, but what if I could just give you an example? There's a national HMO lobby group that presented to government, and what they're thinking is that in areas where concentrations of HMOs have developed or are developing, the local authority must have powers to licence all such properties. And there are areas within these wards, these two wards, but also in other wards within the borough, but particularly those wards, because the houses naturally lend themselves to converting into additional units. And so what we're saying is that the officers prepare a protocol for this committee to discuss covering the wards, these areas where there's quite a large number of conversions. And there's very clear in relation to this license, this lobby group, as to how they define what a HMO is, and we've put that at the end, at the bottom of the piece of paper that we handed out to you. We're also saying that we'd like councillors from other wards are encouraged to discuss with the officers where the issue of HMOs in their wards indicates a requirement for such an additional licensing scheme. And one of the highest wards within the borough is Brookvale, who has a considerable number. And, you know, there's some wards within this borough have no HMOs. So, you know, it isn't an issue for all areas, but what we're saying is that we would like to see this additional licensing requirement, because it is an issue for us in our wards. It really is an issue, and it impacts not just on the people that are living within those houses, but on the neighbours and the community, and it is a significant impact. And I don't think the council is aware of that problem and how bad it is, and how, if you have just in a small close 3 to 5 houses that are converted, what impact that has on you. There was a gentleman in Popley who'd lived there all the time. He'd come down as part of the overspill, and he's one of the first people into his property, loved his property. Next door has now been converted into a HMO, and his quality of life is really been reduced as a result of the HMO. And the noise, the parking, the general, those people that are living there have no connection to the area. They're moving, they're very transient. And as a Labour group, we're not opposed to HMOs. We recognise there's an absolute place for them within the housing strategy, but it's an important part of the housing strategy. But we need to make sure that we manage that. We know where they are, that they're well managed, and we have landlords that work with us to ensure good practice. Southampton, when they introduced this idea, they didn't do it, as you said, Martin, across the whole town. They picked areas of concentration and worked on those areas first to introduce these additional requirements, and it worked really well. And in relation to the example that we talked about in the beginning of the report, which is in Normanton Road, that landlord, he was, the police were at that meeting with that landlord, but when he was interviewed, you know, and it says in the report that he wasn't able to, he didn't have tenancy agreements and he didn't have rent deposits. The reality is he couldn't even tell us who was living in the properties. They were that transient that he didn't know who was there. And there was such concerns about, and I can't stress to you how awful and what was happening within this property. And I don't think it's acceptable within a report that we just say that this landlord said there wasn't a need for tenancy agreements because the residents of that house were transient. he didn't know who was in his properties. He had no idea. Now that isn't good. We don't want that in this town. We don't want that type of landlord. We want good landlords, and we've got some very good landlords. And in relation to what we're saying in C is that we're looking at officers developing a charter of standards, and that we need to ensure absolutely good practice. And I think it would be really good of us to, as a housing committee, to have that report that we've had sight of tonight come to the committee to look at it, and would we want to see additional things put into that report? None of us have seen it, and that's concerning that there is a document that's out there that none of us have sight of. But I think that there is need for a charter of high standards that we all work to across the private sector, and not only in HMOs, but we ensure that all private sector landlords are working to the highest possible standards, but particularly when you're housing many people into a small unit, and that some of those could be quite vulnerable people, particularly now because they won't be getting, those people under 35 won't be getting housing benefit unless they're living in shared housing. We need to ensure that it's of the highest possible standard.
I should take Councillor Washbourne next, as she seconded it, so thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to second this motion calling for additional mandatory licensing in defined geographical areas. As stated in the motion, we mention Norden, Popley East and Popley West, those being the typical estates that we are seeing increases of HMOs on, and obviously we as ward councillors are hearing about the problems involved with that, and the impact on the communities. In Popley, as with many other areas of Basingstoke, car parking is already an existing problem for householders, and obviously with the increase of HMOs, this obviously creates more of a problem, because typically HMOs are housing single or couples, which could mean that there could be as many as 4 times as more cars fighting for parking spaces, and obviously this then in turn can increase tension between neighbours, and obviously lead to possible antisocial behaviour and neighbour disputes. Also, other concerns in regard to HMOs on these old established estates are that typically these style of housing are usually 3-bedroom terrace type housing, and obviously we've heard from Councillor James today in regard to the number of people that could be occupying those houses, and those houses at the moment are typically unlicensed. You could have as many as 12 people living in those houses. Obviously there's the safety, the fire concerns involved with those. Obviously being terraced houses, you're not just typically talking about the safety of those living in those HMOs, you're also talking about the safety of those neighbouring the HMOs as well. So I think the motion that we've tabled is a way forward. Obviously we're asking for officers to prepare a proposal at the moment for the wards that we've obviously outlined in the motion, but obviously again there may well be other wards that would need to come in on that. Honestly, as I say, I'll second this motion tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. I know, apologise to Councillor Baker, and we come back to Councillor Baker.
Thank you. As I was saying, I was minded to support this amendment, and for a lot of the reasons that the mover and seconder have mentioned, and as the portfolio holder said, HMOs are an important part of the housing mix, and it's right that we endeavour to ensure that they are of a good standard and are safe for people to live in. And I do see mandatory licensing helping us to achieve that aim. I am only nervous about identifying 3 wards in particular, with no rationale explaining why those 3 wards, and apart from the reference to the nature of the properties there, but in the way that Basingstoke was developed, there were a lot of wards around the south of Basingstoke that had very similar housing layouts plans. So I think we actually do need a more clearly defined rationale for saying why we should make licensing mandatory in certain wards and not in others. And a first step to doing that, getting that, I think, will be when we have the circulation of the updated list of HMOs, because that will allow us to see where the concentration is. And I think that is what should guide us as to which areas we feel need to have mandatory licensing. I'm not far off thinking that it ought to be mandatory on across the whole of the borough, but I appreciate the workload, the additional workload that it would involve, and therefore, could understand if, we singled out the wards where there was a much higher concentration of HMOs, but we need to have the data for that. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I have Councillor Miller, Beerman and Peach. If I could ask you to be a bit briefer, please. Councillor Miller.
Thank you, Chair. Hopefully I'll be brief. I understand and I hear the debate, I understand the sentiments coming from the Labour group. However, if you've got a problem, the first port of call, point of contact in the council. We don't need to debate individual properties in this committee. What we're trying to do is establish a system that works for Basingstoke. We've heard detail now that the organisation within the council has established the single point of contact, and we've got some joined up thinking, and I quite agree with you. It's a good thing to hear that we do start to join the departments up. So I fully support that. It's already been described by the briefing of the officer on the report that all councillors, and this is where I go back to what we should be doing as ward councillors, if we spot any issues with an HMO, we should go straight to the people who are running the HMO and potentially licensing them in the council. We don't have to wait a quarter of a year to bring it back to this committee. We need to actually take action, and that would help the residents and the poor people, as we've heard described tonight from Councillor James, that are suffering because of these poor landlords. Let's get the work done. Let's get them in here. If the police need to be involved, and violence, I agree with Councillor Peach, let's get the police in and sort it out, or social services, or whoever the appropriate people are. We can do that off our own bat. We don't need a committee to turn around and say it. It's all in place. So that, I'm afraid, that's covered A and B. C, I cannot support. We started off this committee, this particular paper, with the chair mentioning you can't go across private landlords. This paper's about HMOs. HMOs we have a certain control over through national legislation, through best practice, as been described tonight. Private landlords, how many private landlords? You can't enforce it. It's a nice idea, but if you come up with a policy or a licensing scheme, you've got to be able to enforce it. There's all kinds of different licenses. All of us around the table hold various licenses for various activities, but it's controlled. It's within a system. It's policed, and I use a small p on that. So I'm afraid everything, the first two are covered, because we heard that tonight. I appreciate that document. First time any of us saw this tonight. I don't know if the officer wants to say when it was produced. I think it was in very recently. It's a 13, 14 document, but it can only have been in the last couple of weeks, I think. And so we're all awaiting our own copy of this. I couldn't agree more. But I think C on this amendment to the recommendation goes too far. And as the chair said, if you're going to start talking about private landlords, you're going to lose half the committee this evening. I can't support the amendment, Chair. Thank you.
Councillor Bierman, please.
Chair, thank you. I do like the amendment in general. I mean, it doesn't commit us to anything. It's asking that a report be brought forward. And some of the arguments that, for instance, Councillor Miller has just made could be considered and either supported or rejected as part of the report. I have a little difficulty in the areas being specified in the way that they are, and if the Labour group were happy to accept a very mini amendment to their wording, then I would certainly support this motion, this amendment, though I probably would do it anyway because I think the heart's in the right place, but I think it could be improved if one were to say officers prepare a proposal for this committee to discuss wait a minute, I'll get better get the right paragraph. B. Sorry, I've lost my thread here a bit. To discuss, right, there it is. Officers prepare a proposal for this committee to discuss initially areas with high concentrations of HMO. That removes it from being ward specific. Everybody here has said concentrations of HMOs bring problems with them, so we're targeting a known problem, and after all, as I say, we are looking for further information. It doesn't stop us getting on with things in the meantime. And as has been said, Brookvale would be one that one would have to include. And we could argue forevermore which areas should be in and out. Let's let the officers do that. And in a way, that's in the spirit of what Councillor Miller was saying as well, I think.
I'll ask Councillor James to respond to that.
I'm happy to accept the amendment. Why we did those four wards, those three wards, because when we put forward an Article 4 in relation to planning applications, and if a planning application came forward for a HMO, we initially put just the Labour wards. Because lots of people said they didn't want it in their wards, but then eventually then other people said, no, we want it. So we didn't want to say we would impose it on you, because then we thought we might alienate people here tonight. Doesn't say in B, it says that you could then add your name to that list, but I'm happy to amend that. Are you happy with those wording? Thank you, Martin.
The officer wishes to come in here.
Sorry, I just want, it might be better if Tom explains it, but I just want to say there are some specific statutory issues that the committee needs to be aware of. So if you want to just
just to be clear, it is covered in the report, but I'll just emphasise. So I'll go back to it again. You can only impose an additional licensing scheme where you have clear evidence that your existing powers are not sufficient to deal with the problems that you may experience. What we're trying to present in the report is to show you that we have a working practice, we have procedures in place, and when we come across issues, we deal with them in accordance with the legislation we already have, and that does successfully resolve the issues that we encounter. That's the first point, just to make. There are some issues you've made in terms of concerns about concentrations of HMOs, and just to be clear, if a HMO came forward and requested a licence, that wouldn't be a factor we would have regard to. If they meet the standards, they'd get a licence. Whether there's too many in a particular area is not a material issue to determine that licence.
Thank you. Councillor Peach is the last speaker.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, for myself, I said it earlier, kind of, hopefully relatively clearly, but I just believe that this is creating work that is not needed. I think everything is covered in the report. I mean, page 30 of 42, 5.4 through to 5.6, it gives you exactly what you want. So all you need to do is speak to the officers and say, we are concerned that in these areas this is a problem, and then they will look at their statistics. You can demonstrate your cases. It's there for you. This, for me, the reason I can't support it implies that what we're doing right now isn't good enough and that we are failing. That's not the case. They're not failing. We've heard the report. We've had as far as I'm concerned, the evidence to suggest that with the number of HMOs, we are able to manage this situation. But if you do have a specific problem, it says the scheme may be for a defined geographical area. The power's already there for you. I feel like this. I agree with the sentiments. I understand why you've put it in, but everything you're asking for has been done. So I just can't support it on that basis. You have what you're asking for already. It's all here.
Right. Thank you. Would Councillor James, would you like to sum up and clarify the amendment to your amendment?
What I think, picking up on Councillor Peach's point, in relation to 8.1 of the report, it talks about every licensed HMO is inspected on an annual basis. We don't know, out of the 124 unlicensed, how many are inspected, on all those who are not, that we don't know about, that are definitely not inspected. And this is a growing trend, as the officer said, and we're going to see even more coming forward. If you look at the planning applications that are coming forward because of the change in government policy in relation to housing benefit. Therefore, and there are certain areas within the town which will lend themselves to conversions. And Brookvale, Popley, Norden and areas will be those areas. And we're seeing a concentration. And what we're wanting to see is that those properties are licensed. The fire service say, regardless of whether it's a 2-storey or a 3-storey, it still has the same fire risks. And if you're a neighbour next door, either side of this property, you're very vulnerable to that property that is unlicensed. And I think we have a duty to people that are living in the neighbouring properties to ensure that we ensure that the properties of the highest standard and that the risks imposed are and that we protect the people living there, because there are going to be more and more people living in HMOs as this housing policy goes forward. So I urge you to support that. And the amended words are on A, officers prepare a protocol for this committee to discuss initially areas with high concentrations of HMOs for an additional licensing scheme covering all HMOs defined by the National HMO Network.
Thank you. Can we take on the recommendation part A first? So all those in favour, this is the recommendation on the sheet in front of you. There's A, B and C, part A. All those in favour of A, as read out by Councillor James and that just this minute ago, could you please show? 1, 2, 6. 6 in favour. All those against, please. 6. So as the chair, I can ask... well, yeah, I'm not in favour of it. So, right, so that's A out. Can we take B now, please?
Richard, did you use your casting vote?
Yes, I did use my casting vote. I'm not particularly keen on using casting votes, but in this instance it was a draw, so I had to. We now move on to B, which is again in red on the extra bit in front of us. Would Councillor James like to read out what B's, because it is your amendment, then we'll vote on it.
That councillors and other wards are encouraged to discuss with officers whether the issue of HMOs in their wards indicates a requirement for an additional licensing scheme in their own ward.
Just say, if in view of the fact that the A has been lost, I wouldn't say it's nonsense altogether, but it certainly needs to be reworded somewhat. Yeah, it's gone. Yeah.
So I'm sorry, I'm not quite clearly. Do you wish? Sorry. B. So B is now fallen. Then you're saying, right? We now move on to item C. It's long, and I think we can all see it's in front of us. So I won't ask you to read that one out. On item C, I don't feel I can vote as I am a landlord. So I will ask Councillor Peach, are you a landlord? Councillor Miller, are you a landlord? Could you please take the chair for item C? Thank you.
Evening all. Are there any other members who are landlords?
I'm a landlord, but in relation to my interest, I don't see, why I'd have to leave the room. I'm absolutely in favour of having the highest possible standard for my tenants. So I'm very happy to be here, and I'm proposing that we all work to the highest possible standard. So I'm very happy to be.
Okay. Would you like to read out? Do we need to?
No,
Was there?
we think we've already in front of us, so it's just a vote on that.
Okay.
Item C.
All those in favour of item C? All those against? It's carried. Item C is carried. I'm just going to ask the officers something. Yeah.
I'll just clarify, I'm back in the chair, and I'll ask the officer to clarify now what is the substantive motion that we will be voting on.
Sorry, Chair.
Again, Chair, if I may humbly submit, so that we're all clear, we're talking about the motion as now amended, yes? So it's a substantive motion as amended.
Yes, that's what I was saying, the substantive motion as amended. So could we please vote on that? All those in favour? Can I vote on it?
Well, I thought you don't necessarily have to vote. I think the committee's just agreeing.
So the committee's agreeing on it? Okay, thank you very much. There are one or two points I did want to say. Ask all councillors to report HMOs to the officers, and if anything illegal is going on, report it to the police. Don't wait for the committee. And the best practice book, rather than incur postage, it may be better to put it in all group rooms, so that the group rooms have sufficient best practice books. Yeah, a copy for every councillor, but put in the group rooms, because it will cost postage. It is a heavy book. Are you happy with them going into group rooms? Yes. And we'll pick them up from there. Okay, thank you. Sorry, Councillor Mrs Court.
Sorry, is it not available online?
No. There are advertising problems, apparently. Thank you very much. Meeting closed.